So today we have a special presentation about the history of Hungary, and I think the reason why it's important to discuss the history of Hungary is because it shows how a people can change so much over time, but throughout trials and tribulations of history, retain so much of what makes them unique, even under an immense amount of pressure. So the first slide that we're going to go over today is the Magyars, or the main people of Hungary. So they're descended from a tribe that lived slightly west of the Ural Mountains in what is today Russia. However, they migrated east in search of a better life. And they were a horse tribe, similar to the Mongolians or the Scythians, or the Huns, especially the Huns. However, we don't know a lot about them in this stage of their existence because they were a nomadic society. But they were probably really similar to other nomadic tribes that existed, especially the Huns or Scythians, who are from the same general area. But the main legacy of this element of their existence, this age of their existence, is their name, the Magyar, which is the Hungarian ethnonym, which is the name that they call themselves in the Hungarian language. They don't use the word Hungarian, that's an English construction. And the name for the Hungarian language it's still called the Magyar language. However, it's an important time to discuss that Magyars are not the only ethnicity that live in Hungary. There are others, like the Danube Germans or the Slovakians. But this is the main tribe that would form the Hungarian nation as they migrated west into Europe.
Who was there prior to the Magyars?
So in the Pannonian Basin, which is this area, previously there lived many other tribes. There lived Germanic tribes like the Goths and the Saxons, and also other horse tribes that migrated into that area like the Huns and the Scythians and a lot of other ones. However, when the Magyars first migrated into Europe, they were raiders. They rode in on their horses and attacked and then fled to their sort of base of operations in Pannonia. And they were not Christians, they were heathens. So they were attacking Christian kingdoms. And the main power that resisted the Hungarian advances into Europe was the Holy Roman Empire, who we talked about a little bit last time. But the Hungarians lived as nomadic raiders across Europe until their final defeat in 955 by Otto the Great of the Holy Roman Empire.
Why were they called Huns or what? Hungarians if it's Magyar?
Well, you see, Europeans couldn't keep all their nomadic tribes invading them straight. So they called them Hungarians because they thought they were the Huns who had returned. But the Hungarians, the Magyars, obviously knew that they were not Huns. They were a different tribe, but the name stuck. And when they arrived in Pannonia, which was the Roman name for Hungary, they call it Magyarország, which means land of the Hungarians. And Hungarians still use this word as the name for their country. They don't call it Hungary. They call it Magyarország. And when they settled down, they abandoned nomadic life and adopted the European way of living and settled cities and towns. And the land of Pannonia was very good for the Hungarians because they lived as nomadic tribes and they had sufficient pasturage in Pannonia for their horses. But over time, this pasturage started to decay and not become as optimal for the nomadic lifestyle, which is what triggered their conversion to living in sedentary societies. And the Carpathian Mountains formed Hungary's northern and eastern border. It's a mountain range that surrounds the Pannonian Basin on the east side. So now we need to talk about their conversion to Christianity, which happened in the year 1000. So obviously they were not Christians originally when they started invading Europe. But as they started to settle down and enter into peaceful relations with European countries, they decided that it was time to convert to Christianity so they could have good relations with other countries. So they founded the Hungarian monarchy out of the Hungarian Grand Chiefdom, which the dynasty that had been ruling over Hungary before its conversion, the Arpad dynasty, decided to convert to Christianity. And they had relations with the Greeks, who called their country West Turkey, because they thought the Hungarians were related to the Turks, which was correct. And the Hungarians gave up their nomadic lifestyle, and they created this, which is the Holy Crown of Hungary, which is the most important Hungarian national relic. It's well over 1,000 years old, and it still exists today. It's in the Hungarian Parliament building, but it's had quite a journey throughout history. It even, later on in history, ended up at Fort Knox in America, because it was saved from destruction by the communists during World War II, which was quite a remarkable thing. It was later returned to Hungary.
The communists saved it, or the American?
No, the American army, when it was invading Hungary during World War II, made sure to save the Holy Crown of Hungary from being destroyed by the Soviet army. So now we need to talk about a little bit more of what happened after Hungary converted to Christianity. So the period 1000 to 1301, which is the period that Hungary was ruled by its original dynasty, the Arpad dynasty. So King Stephen was the monarch who converted to Christianity. He was later, became so popular that he was canonized and became a saint, which was quite impressive. He was the first Hungarian to achieve sainthood. And the rest of Hungary was gradually converted over a period of about 2 centuries, to where by around 1200, paganism was basically dead in Hungary. Hungary was not a mono-ethnic realm. It had many different ethnicities present inside the Pannonian Basin. You had, of course, the Magyars, which were the main tribe, but there were Germans, Croatians, Slovaks, and Vlachs, or Romanians, that also lived there. But Latin was, of course, the main language of the church, the judiciary, and the nobility. And that was so that they could communicate with each other effectively, regardless of their ethnic origin. And despite this, sort of chaotic ethnic and religious, chaotic ethnic and linguistic diversity, the thing that held all Hungarians together was that they were members of the Catholic Church, and they prospered together under the Christian faith. So here's a map of Europe in about 1000 to 1100, and Hungary right here. And Hungary's borders remained basically the same throughout its entire existence until 1918, but we'll get to that.
Which color is Hungary?
Hungary is this little purple blob right here. And then this is the Holy Roman Empire. Poland is right here. And then to the east, you have the Russian principalities, which were not united. And then to the south, it had a border with the Byzantine Empire, which was a declining power at this time because of the Turkish invasions.
The Byzantines were Greeks?
Yes, they were the Greeks. Just clarifying. And also Serbia was on the border to the south. But the reason why Hungary's borders remain the same is because it had the Carpathian Mountains extending on its eastern border, which served as a natural wall against invasion. So, as Hungary switched over from tribal society to feudalism, it became a respected power in Eastern Europe, which was quite a large country, with a lot of natural resources at its command. And in 1102, it merged with Croatia under a personal union, which is when two countries have a common monarch. This union with Croatia lasted until 1918. And after the extinction of the Arpad dynasty, the Hungarian nobles switched over to electing the king from among themselves, or by choosing a successful noble from a foreign country. And Hungary had quite a productive agricultural economy. It was a very large exporter of grain to Europe, and became pretty wealthy compared to some other European countries which were suffering from endemic poverty. But Hungary did have a couple shakeups. There were the Mongols, who invaded from the east, coming over the Carpathians. But as Hungary was they were quite adept warriors, and they had adopted the Western European methods of combat. The mounted knights, and really knights were the core of the Hungarian army. But also they retained their traditional steppe methods of warfare. The horse archery was quite prevalent among Hungarians. But they fought well against the Mongols and eventually drove them out. But by the time the Mongols had reached Hungary, they were starting to run out of steam with their conquests. So it was really quite a short-lived affair. But after that, they also suffered the Black Death, but so did everyone else. And they lost quite a bit of their population to that. And in the eastern region of Transylvania, which you may have heard of from a certain novel by Bram Stoker, they brought in Germans from the Holy Roman Empire because they were famed for their castle building skills, to build castles along the passes going out of the Carpathians in order to provide a strong defense against Turkish invasion. And these Germans were settled in these areas, and they became German majority areas surrounded by Hungarians and Vlachs. But the German way to refer to Transylvania is called Siebenbürgen, which means the land of the seven castles. Someone get a phone call? Oh, okay. And they became the first of the Hungarian Germans, which the Germans in Hungary were quite a big demographic until eventually they started to, we'll get to how they started to decline. Everything was going quite well for Hungary until, first we need to talk about John Hunyadi. So, he was born in 1407 at Hunyad Castle, Transylvania, but now it is known as Hunedoara in Romania. And he died August 11, 1456 in Belgrade, Kingdom of Hungary, now Belgrade in Serbia. So John Hunyadi was a noble, a Hungarian noble, but he had Vlach ancestry. His family was from Wallachia in Romania. And he began his career as a lower-ranked noble, but he was by no means had a small estate. His estate totaled 40 villages, which was quite a bit. And he distinguished himself as a warrior against the Turks, who were starting their invasion into Hungary. And that's in the next slide, but I thought it would be important to explain this first. He studied the combat methods of the Bohemian Hussites, who were they were a rebel group in Bohemia, all the way up here around Hungary's northern border, who had revolutionized European warfare by being the first Europeans to really adopt firearms and use them successfully against the Bohemian monarchy. But John Hunyadi was quite interested in these new methods of warfare, and he adopted them for the Hungarian army. Eventually he was promoted to voivode, or governor of Transylvania, which was quite an accomplishment for somebody of a rather low rank like him. He led many successful battles against the Turks, and the Pope and the Emperor supported his crusade against the Turkish invasion of Europe. And eventually he became the regent of Hungary, which was a really astounding act of upper mobility for a person who was not even a baron. John Hunyadi was a small holding noble. His successes started to decline as the Ottomans started to gain more and more the upper hand in attacking Hungary as their conquests grew. However, the Ottomans, I need to talk about the regency. He became regent of Hungary during a period of instability following the death of the king, which was quite it's a very large shakeup whenever the king dies. So Hunyadi helped smooth it out, and he ruled Hungary during the infancy of the new king. However, the Ottomans began another offensive, and they started besieging Belgrade. And Hunyadi and his troops relieved the besieged city and liberated it from Ottoman control. But the celebration was short-lived as he died of disease in his camp. The end. That's how John Hunyadi died. But his legacy was quite important, as also he became the father of one of Hungary's kings, which we'll talk about later, his son Matthias Corvinus. You might have heard of him. But he was known as the only fear of Turks, which is quite a nickname if I do say so myself. And this is what he looked like, his portrait. Now the portrait is a little bit, I would say not a little bit, but was produced quite a long time after his death, so this is what somebody imagined John Hunyadi might have looked like. But, and then here is his son, Matthias Corvinus, who is the second son of John Hunyadi because his first died. He was born February 24th, 1443 in Kolozsvár, or Klausenberg was the German name, Transylvania. And he died April 6th, 1490 in Vienna, Imperial Archduchy of Austria. So he became elected to the throne of Hungary after Ladislaus, who was the king that John Hunyadi ruled as the regent for when he was a child. He was elected to the throne because John Hunyadi was so popular. He basically wrote his name to the throne, which is, there's nothing else really like it, ever happened. But he created the Black Army of Hungary, they were an army of salaried mercenaries, and are often considered to be the first professional standing army in Europe after the Romans. You know, they've gone quite a while without having a professional standing force. But it was an expensive thing to keep around. He increased the taxes in order to pay for it, which was not very popular with the Hungarian people, but they understood that it was necessary to keep them safe. And he increased the power of the lower nobility, from which he was drawn, as compared to the power of the barons and upper nobility, which he and both he and his father detested. But also there was an alternative claim on the throne of Hungary by Emperor Frederick III, who was the uncle of Ladislaus V, and he actually continued to claim the throne of Hungary, even though Matthias Corvinus had been elected to it. It's pretty crazy. And this is a good time for me to talk about what actually makes a king of Hungary. And the Kingdom of Hungary did not work the same way as Western European kingdoms like France or England did. The reign of the new king did not immediately begin after the death of the old one. He had to actually be crowned physically with the Holy Crown of Hungary to continue with the monarchy. And that's what made Matthias Corvinus the legitimate king and made Frederick III nothing but a pretender. So now we're going to talk about the Ottoman invasion, which was the first, what I would call the first fall of Hungary, what caused an immense downturn in Hungarian history for the first time, really. So the Ottoman Turks were expanding their empire. They'd already taken Constantinople, which was a monumentous occasion in the history of Europe, was the fall of Constantinople to the Turks, ending the Byzantine Empire, and, in the opinions of some, finally ending the Roman Empire. However, now the Ottoman Turks had turned all of their attention to conquering the next country over, which was Hungary. It was really quite a hard time for Hungary because they had already been suffering attempts at Ottoman invasion, but now the entire Ottoman army had been turned on them after conquering Constantinople. So now, after a battle called Mohacs, Mohacs is a town about in the center of Hungary. I don't know if it's on this map here, but it's literally right in the middle of Hungary, near the crossing of the Danube. This battle was immensely consequential. It happened in 1526. And basically, Hungary's army had been gotten together by a very young king. His name was Louis II. And he was rather inexperienced at war. And the Hungarian army was about 40% the size of the Turkish host, which was quite massive. Not to mention the outdated weaponry and tactics of the Hungarian army. And they were roundly beaten at Mohacs. and this is what opened the door to all of Eastern Hungary becoming an Ottoman vassal state. Louis II actually died at Mohacs. He was like 27 years old, and while he was riding away from the battle trying to flee, he fell off his horse into the Danube and drowned in the river because his heavy armor held him down. He couldn't get up. Yeah. However, only a very small foothold of the original Kingdom of Hungary remained around the northwest, and this is called Royal Hungary. So whenever I refer to Royal Hungary, it means this part. And this Ottoman occupation will last for another 2 centuries. And this is what Hungary has to try to overcome for another 200 years. So, we have to talk about the reconquest of Hungary. So, the Habsburg dynasty of Austria, and this is the flag of Austria right here during this time, had been selected for the kingship of Hungary by the Estates General, or the Assembly of Hungary, due to their powerful military and economic capabilities. So if I go to this map here, which I'm going to use here, all of this land to the west here is Austria, which is lands under Habsburg control. And the Habsburgs have been the ruling dynasty of the Holy Roman Empire for about more or less 3 or 4 centuries at this point. So they were really quite powerful and entrenched. So the Hungarian parliament decided to elect the Holy Roman Emperor to the kingship of Hungary so that he would use his resources to drive away the Turks and liberate Hungary. And slowly but surely over time, the Hungarian side would gain the upper hand in the Ottoman wars. And also with the influence of many other conflicts happening around the same time, like the 30 Years' War was also used as an excuse by the Austrian leadership to invade Hungary because it was under Ottoman control. And Transylvania was an Ottoman vassal state, and it was aiding the Protestant side in the 30 Years' War, but I could make a whole other presentation about that. a lot of this, it's its own presentation. I'm very simplifying it. But at the Second Battle of Mohacs, which is where the Turks were finally driven out of Hungary, at the same place where they had secured their dominion. But at the Second Battle of Mohacs, Ottoman power was broken in the same spot where it was forged, which is quite a poetic ending to the whole thing. So now Hungary had been recaptured, and it entered into a period of relative prosperity compared to the Ottoman occupation. And the Hungarian Royal Army became more and more closely connected with the Austrian Imperial Army because they shared the common monarch. The Habsburg dynasty retained its control of Hungary after helping free it from Ottoman control. But Hungary gradually became more and more integrated with the other Habsburg realms like Austria, and it was generally protested by the nobility who resented the royal authority undermining their autonomy. And there were a couple of revolts during this period, mostly characterized by noble doesn't like what the king is doing, gathers together his small army, tries to attack, doesn't win, revolt is put down. And then moving on to the Napoleonic age, which I'm going to talk about rather briefly. The Royal Hungarian Army fought against Napoleon alongside the imperial troops from Austria. And during this period, royal control in Hungary started to become more and more centralized as the Habsburgs needed to drive the entire efforts of the country behind defeating Napoleon. And the Hungarian Grenadiers, pictured here, were some of the most famous units in the Habsburg army because of their vigor in battle. They would charge right into the enemy and bring him down. And the Royal Hungarian Army contained 12 regiments of foot and 10 hussar regiments. And hussars were a special type of Hungarian cavalry that were famous for their fast speed and their quick attacks. And then we need to talk about the revolt of 1848, which is probably the most significant anti-Habsburg revolt in Hungary because it was influenced by these new ideas of liberal nationalism that were becoming popular in Europe at this time. The Hungarian Estates General had passed laws granting the right to vote to the majority of Hungarian citizens. And the new king, Franz Josef, decided that he didn't like this, that he thought it was detrimental to his policies, so he decided to roll back these laws, and so he could continue on with his very personal style of rule. However, this resulted in the revolt, which was it was basically led by the nobility with the idea that the commoners were the main force behind it, but someone's got to be bankrolling a revolution, right? So after this, the Franz Josef actually agreed to restore Hungary's original constitution, which limited royal power quite a bit.
So did he fail? Did the revolt fail?
The revolt failed, but it resulted in them getting their goal anyway, through negotiations. So it was basically successful, but failed at the same time. It's kind of weird like that. But, so now we're going to talk about Franz Josef, the man himself. So he was born August 18th, 1830, at Schönbrunn Palace in Vienna, in the Imperial Archduchy of Austria. And he died November 21st, 1916, in the same place he was born, Schönbrunn Palace in Vienna, the Imperial Archduchy of Austria. But he ruled from 1830 to 1916. Can you believe that? It's quite a bit. This guy was alive during World War I. And he took the throne of the Habsburg monarchies in 1841. And in the early part of his reign, he ruled as an absolute monarch. He had a very personal style of rule where he and his advisors determined policy with minimal influence from the elected assemblies.
He ruled all of Austria-Hungary.
Yes, all of Austria and Hungary was his, as well as limited control over the other German states, which waned over time due to the rise of Prussia.
So would that make him like as big as Charlemagne in terms of the area that he covered?
No, he was not Charlemagne, but he did have quite a bit of land. He had Hungary and he had Austria. I have a map later on that I'll use to explain it.
Question?
Yes?
When did it start being called the Austro-Hungarian?
1867. I have a slide about that.
Was that here, John, or was that later?
Mm,
It was during his rule.
It was during his reign that he decided to reorganize the empire. But, however, the rising influence of the liberal politicians forced him to give over more and more of his day-to-day decision-making to the elected assemblies of Austria and Hungary. In 1867, he negotiated the reorganization of the Habsburg Empire into the lands represented by the Imperial Council and the Crown Lands of St. Stephen, more commonly referred to as Austria-Hungary. He continued to act as the national leader until his death in 1916 to pneumonia, which he contracted during a walk in his garden with the King of Bavaria while it was raining. Yeah. But he was getting kind of old at that time, so the people said, he's going to drop dead any minute. He was quite old. But I think he did a very good job. I'm not denigrating him, but I'm just... So now we're going to talk about Austria-Hungary a little bit. The Compromise of 1867. So in 1867, the Hungarian political leaders entered into a dialogue with Franz Josef, where they demanded a return to the traditional status of the Kingdom of Hungary as an independent nation from Austria. So by the end of the negotiations, the Austro-Hungarian Compromise emerged. Austria and Hungary had separate prime ministers and separate parliaments, and separate armies specific to the country alone. They were under the control of the prime minister of those countries only. So there was the Austrian KK Landwehr and the Hungarian Honved, which they were basically like the National Guard, but just like the National Guard of Hungary and the National Guard of Austria.
Kind of describe that map.
I'm getting to the map. So this side right here, this green, is the Kingdom of Hungary and the Kingdom of Croatia, which was in a personal union with Hungary. So they shared the same government, but Croatia had quite a bit of autonomy within Hungary. And then on everything in pink here is the lands represented in the Imperial Council, or Austria. So you have also Bohemia, which right here, was considered to be, it was under the Austrian government, but it had quite, just like Croatia, had quite a bit of autonomy. There was Galicia Lodomeria, which is, it was created during the partitions of Poland in 1775. Came within the Austrian sphere of influence during the partitions of Poland. And then everything right here is the Imperial Archduchy of Austria, which is considerably larger than Austria today due to the influence of the post-World War I treaties. There's South Tyrol, which was ceded to Italy, and then there's Slovenia, which is Slovenia today. But anyway.
What's yellow?
Oh yes, the yellow. I'm getting to the yellow. So the yellow is the Condominium of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which was created around 1907 when Austria-Hungary liberated Bosnia from Ottoman control during the Balkan Wars, which was like the prequel to World War I. But this also is kind of also the reason for World War I, because Gavrilo Princip was mad about living in Austria-Hungary, so he decided to murder Franz Ferdinand. During this period, Austria and Hungary were considered to be different countries in international relations. Austria and Hungary had their own embassies in other countries, so like sometimes they're even next door to each other, like the Hungarian missions to Germany and the Austrian one, like literally the buildings were like in a block of each other. So
where's Germany at now?
Oh, well, this is Germany right here.
It's right next.
It's not marked on this map because this map is only concerned with Austria-Hungary, but Austria and Bohemia had a border with Germany. Anyway, let me think here. Oh, right. So they had their own separate money too. Austria used what was it called? The shilling was their money before. It was not called the shilling. I can't remember what it was, but it was not a shilling. But Hungary used the forint, which is actually what their money is called today. And that was broken up into 100 filler, but for the life of me, I should be able to remember what Austrian money was called, but it's not important. But they had their own money. They had their own central banks. And let me think here again. Oh yes. So this period was marked by quite a bit of economic growth and prosperity for Austria and Hungary, due to the specialization of these areas into what they were best in. So Hungary had an economy that was thriving based on agriculture and mining, due to the Carpathians being rich in resources. Budapest became the center of industry in Hungary. Basically all of their industrial was just concentrated in one area, which was Budapest. And then Austria focused, and especially Bohemia. Bohemia became very industrialized, focused entirely on manufactured goods. Anyway, so the Austria and Hungary put together were actually the third most industrialized country in the world, behind Britain and the United States, which was quite an achievement, considering that Britain basically started industrialization. America picked up on that pretty soon after, and then out here in Middle Central Europe, you have this economic juggernaut, which will fall in 1918. Wait, hold on. I actually have something very special to show you guys today. I have the flag of Austria-Hungary in my jacket pocket. My dad said to bring this. Yeah, so.
Imperial and royal. Right?
Yeah. Kaiserlich und Königlich. So we have the Hungarian side over here with the Holy Crown on top of it. And then on the left side we have the Austrian side, which is pretty cool. This is not actually the flag though. This is the civil ensign, which was the flag that was flown by civilian vessels. But Austria and Hungary did not have a collective flag. This is the closest thing they had to a flag that was shared between both of them. But I just think it's really neat. Thanks, Dad, for suggesting that. Back to the presentation. So now we have to talk about the 19th century world and shifting borders around Hungary. So, Wallachia and Moldavia were united in 1859 by personal union under their newly elected prince Alexandru Ion Curza, and became the Principality, later the Kingdom of Romania. So Romania was eyeing Transylvania because of the presence of Vlachs, or Romanian speakers, inside of Transylvania. I think Romania's claim to Transylvania is tenuous at best because of the presence of the Carpathian Mountains cutting the country in two. As well as the presence of Hungarians and Germans in Transylvania, just making it not make much sense to have it outside of Hungary, but I don't make that call. As well as the Kingdom of Serbia being created when it achieved its independence from the Ottoman Empire. It was eyeing the Serbian minority that was present in the voivodeship, which is if I go back to this map here, I can roughly point it out. So the Banate and the voivodeship are this tiny area kind of right here above Serbia. It's in Serbia today due to Trianon, but they were starting to eye that location due to its minority of Serbians that lived there. And all of these claims on Hungary's lands, they were fulfilled in 1918 with the addition of others, which I haven't talked about. So on this map here, Romania looks like this, and then Serbia, which was created here, and then the newly unified Germany, which was in the process of invading France at this time because of the Franco-Prussian War, as well as Italy had been created, which I actually should mention. Italy wanted to claim parts of Austria-Hungary too, because of the presence of Italian speakers on the Dalmatian coast, on the other side of the Adriatic. So the reason why Italy joined into World War I is because they wanted to secure these lands where Italians lived as a minority. As well as actually in Hungary, there's a city, it's called Rijeka, which is in Croatia now, but back then it was called Fiume because it was majority Italian, and that was Hungary's access to the sea. So Hungary actually used to be a maritime power as when it was part of Austria-Hungary, and they based the Austro-Hungarian fleet was based out of Fiume. So now we need to talk about World War I, which is Hungary's national tragedy. Hungary entered into World War I alongside its partner country, Austria, to avenge the death of Franz Ferdinand at the hands of the Serbian government. And more than 7 million Hungarian men were mobilized in World War I, which was about maybe 4 to 5% of the country's population. It was quite a bit. Hungary initially succeeded in bringing Serbia to justice, but as the Russians became involved in the war, Austria-Hungary's military potency started to fall off a cliff, mostly due to internal conflicts inside the military due to people not speaking the same language, because officers in high command spoke German, but like the majority of the soldiers, they spoke a jumble of languages. Hungarian, a lot of Hungarians knew how to speak German, because if you imagine you're living in Hungary, and 2 miles over there's a village where no one knows Hungarian and they only speak German, because it's a German village full of Danube Germans. So a lot of Hungarians had to learn how to speak German so they could communicate with their countrymen. There were also the Slavs who spoke a whole jumble of Slavic languages that high command just didn't get. There was linguistic conflict inside the Hungarian and Austrian army. There was it was a train wreck, the Austro-Hungarian army in World War I. Not to mention the incompetency of the high command under the general, what's his name? He's general staff guy, Konrad von Hunzendorf. He was a terrible general. In 1916, Franz Josef died, which was tragic. And his nephew, who was the third in line to the throne after Franz Ferdinand, his name was Charles, and actually he had no idea he was going to be the king. We're going to get to his life, which was crazy. a little later on. But basically, Charles took over Austria-Hungary after the death of Franz Ferdinand, and he tried to pull Austria and Hungary out of the war. He tried to negotiate peace deals with the Allies, but Allies weren't having any of it because they were trying to get. Yes, Dad? Is that a question?
Ferdinand was Hans Joseph's.
He was Franz Josef's nephew, because all of Franz Josef's children had died. A lot of them had really crazy stories on how it happened, but I'm not going to get to that. Anyway, basically all of Franz Josef's children were dead, and then Franz Ferdinand was literally the last guy he had left. And then they're really reaching for the bottom of the barrel when it comes to succession when they got Charles. But Charles takes over the government. He tries to pull Austria-Hungary out of the war, but the Allies, they want to break apart Hungary so they can get out all the nice stuff Hungary has. So a lot of subversive elements in the Kingdom of Hungary. A lot of socialists, communists, and also ethnic nationalists like Slovakians and Croatians, and all of these ethnic minority groups that were seeking their independence from Hungary for nationalistic reasons. Were making clandestine deals with the Entente. And this resulted in their rebel groups getting into the governments of Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, after the end of the war, because they helped negotiate the overthrow of Hungary. And Hungary was defeated by the attrition and overwhelming force of the Allies during the war, and the Allies would abuse Hungary with the Treaty of Trianon, which is something we're going to get to really quick. But first, we talk about a little bit more about Charles. So he was born on 17th August 1887 in Austria, and he died 1st of April 1922 in Portugal. He'd been exiled to Portugal. So he was heir to Austria-Hungary after Franz Ferdinand got murdered, and he was known for being the first Habsburg monarch to have attended a public school instead of being privately tutored. However, he did attend a rather prestigious one. He attended the Schotten Gymnasium, which was intended to be the model for all public schools in Austria-Hungary. But still, nonetheless, it was quite scandalous that a member of the royal family was attending a school with commoners. So he took over Austria and Hungary after Franz Josef died, and he tried to get a peace deal with the Allies, but this failed due to Allied designs on Austria-Hungary. He got exiled in 1918 as a result of the peace deal. It wasn't much of a deal with Austria-Hungary, and he was exiled to first Switzerland, and he took his family with him. He had 6 children, and he was a very young man, and he already had 6 children with his wife. He was very devoted to his family. And he attempted to regain the throne of Hungary twice in 1921, but he was defeated by the post-war leader of Hungary, who was Regent Horthy. We'll talk about Horthy later. But after this, his family couldn't afford to live in Switzerland anymore because they lived in poverty, not having any money after they were kicked out of Austria-Hungary. So they had to go and live in Portugal. And they lived on the island of Madeira, which is this little island out in the Atlantic that is part of Portugal. But he lived for a while there, but then he also died of respiratory infection. I guess there's something about the Habsburgs that predisposes them to that, but he was a very pious man. He lived his life in the Catholic Church. He was very pious. He was brought up by his mother in the religion. And he was beatified by Pope John Paul II in 2004. He's on the 3rd last step to become a saint. He's only got one more step before he's Saint Charles of Austria. Which is a very impressive thing. I hope he reaches that. And then here's a picture of him at his wedding to his wife, Empress Zita, who was Zita of Bourbon-Parma, who had family ties to the Bourbon dynasty of France and Spain. And I could get into the whole history of that, but I don't have time. So now we're going to talk about the Treaty of Trianon, which is the second fall of Hungary after the Ottoman invasion and occupation. So due to being on the losing side of World War I, Hungary was subjected to a violent and humiliating peace treaty. So Woodrow Wilson, who you may know as President of the United States, published his manifesto of the 14 points, where basically he said we need to ensure that national minorities have their own separate states, which Woodrow Wilson intended this so that Austria-Hungary would never rise again and he wouldn't have to worry about Central Europe forming a power bloc. He used his power and influence to break apart the Kingdom of Hungary, giving Transylvania to Romania, southwest Hungary to Croatia, upper Hungary to Czechoslovakia, the Burgenland, which is a region in West Hungary, populated entirely by Germans, to Austria, who also was a fellow loser in the war. Can you imagine being the fellow loser in the war, but you received part of your allies' territory? I mean, this is really just done to make a point against Hungary. And the voivodeship and the Banate went to Serbia. And Hungary lost more than 70% of its previous land area. 70% of your country gone in an instant. And families were torn apart by this. You know, there's like invisible walls were erected separating the family members from each other. And actually in Hungary today, there's a memorial of the Trianon Treaty, where it's just, there's the middle of the street and there's two walls. And on these walls, there's the names of every Hungarian village, town, and city that was lost to Trianon. And the names are bigger based on how many people live there. You know, one day I'm going to go there and I think I'd cry. But more than 2 million Magyars and the other ethnicities like the Danube Germans became separated from Hungary by invisible walls put up by the Allies. And yes, families were torn apart, and of course, Hungarians who found themselves outside of Hungary overnight experienced much ethnic discrimination and mistrust by their occupying countries, especially in Romania and Czechoslovakia, and also in Yugoslavia, just everywhere. And then, so here we're going to use this topographic map to explain. So, I mentioned earlier that Carpathians separate the rest of Romania with Transylvania. I mean, this is why it just doesn't make any sense. It's why Transylvania is part of Hungary, is because it's inside the Carpathian Basin. And then up here in Slovakia, well, what is now Slovakia, Upper Hungary, it was a mountainous region, it was populated by Slavs instead of other Hungarian ethnicities. And then in the west here, this is Burgenland right here. This is the part that was given over to Austria, and then also the Banate and the voivodeship are right there. And then this is the county map of Hungary. So this is the post-Trianon borders of Hungary. Is this little spot in the middle? It's basically a reservation for Hungarians. And then this area on the outside here is the pre-war borders of the Kingdom of Hungary. And Hungary had 64 counties that made it up since 1876, after there was some reform. But all that was left in Hungary is basically Budapest at the center, with only a couple of the cities that made up Hungary still left inside of it. And these new borders, they have quite a specific shape to them, and these borders were designed intentionally to exclude Hungary from as much natural resources and infrastructure that they could get away with. Hungary lost 80% of its access to mining and timber, and they also lost the majority of their railroad infrastructure. Most of Hungary's railroads were located outside of this central area, and they would just go into Budapest and pass through some other cities, but the majority of Hungary's railroad infrastructure was divvied up by the Allies. Budapest was the largest city, but other cities included Szeged, Pressburg or Pozsony, Gyulafehérvár, Esztergom, Kolozsvár or Klausenburg, which was the capital of Transylvania, Debrecen, Brasov, which is in Romania now, is called Brasov, Fiume, Székesfehérvár, and Visegrad, and among others, which you might have heard of a couple of those cities before. Oh, sorry, we missed the ethnic map. So this is the ethnic map of the Kingdom of Hungary. Red areas are areas where the Hungarians comprised 90% of the population. or Magyars. The green area is in the north, or Slovakia. It's quite a bit of green right there, which is Slavic populations, but interspersed among them, especially in the major population centers in the cities, Hungarian Magyars were the majority. In Transylvania, it was quite an even distribution of a bunch of different types of ethnicities. Orange areas are German, red areas are Magyar, and the pink areas were Vlachs. And then in the south, we have green, a different type of green, which is the other Slavic inhabitants of Hungary, which is why Serbia, they were a minority there, so Serbia claimed that area. And then over here in the west, there's the Burgenland, which was German. And this ethnic map, very sorry about that. This ethnic map is the key to understanding the post-Trianon borders. But as you can see, the post-war borders of Hungary do not correspond to even the most heavily dense Magyar-populated regions. There were still quite a bit of areas that would have clearly belonged to post-war Hungary if the treaty hadn't been so harsh. So, now we need to talk about the post-World War I chaos and depression in Hungary, of which there was quite a bit. So, communism was on the rise in post-war Hungary as economic downturn forced people to turn to communism. There was unrest in Hungarian towns and cities when they learned that they had come under foreign occupation. Like, imagine living in Kolozsvár and there's Romanian soldiers walking down the street telling them that they don't live in Hungary anymore, you live in Romania, right? So there was quite a bit of unrest and agitation against foreign occupation. The economy of post-war Hungary was in shambles due to its separation from around 60% or more of its economic output pre-war. Separation from their natural resources and their railroads was basically Hungary fell into famine. The new borders, like I said earlier, they purposely excluded Hungary from its valuable resources and industry. Hungary relied on international investment to regain its footing, which this international investment throughout the 1920s would come from fascist Italy, and then later on in the 30s, Nazi Germany would start investing in Hungary, and later on this would force Hungary to basically become a Nazi lapdog. And there were various short-lived insurgencies and skirmishes that happened throughout post-war Hungary. And then there's the Hungarian Soviet Republic. So the Hungarian communist leader, Bela Kun, started a communist revolt in post-war Hungary that resulted in the brief formation of the Hungarian Soviet Republic. Spoiler alert, this isn't the first time Hungary falls to communism. This prompted Miklos Horthy, who was a leader in the Hungarian Navy during World War I, to form the National Army and take back Hungary from communist usurpation. However, it was very short, but it is significant due to playing a large role in the creation of the Second Kingdom of Hungary in 1920. They also fought the occupying Yugoslav and French Romanian forces. So the French were helping the Yugoslavs and the Romanians occupy Hungary during this time as a result of the League of Nations mandate. However, it didn't have full control of the country. There were numerous small warlords resisting the communist government, but Miklos Horthy was able to rally together these disparate counter-revolutionary warlords to defeat the communists. Foreshadowing. So now we need to talk a little bit more about the man himself, Miklos Horthy de Nagybanya. So he was born 18th of June, 1868 in Kenderes, which is this rural estate in central Hungary. And he died 9th of February, 1957 in Estoril, Portugal. This guy was also exiled to Portugal, just like Blessed Charles of Austria. There's just supposed to be something about deporting unwanted Hungarians to Portugal. He was one of 8 children in his family, and he grew up in the large estate owned by his father, who was a member of the petty nobility. But he sought a life of adventure, and he pursued life in the Austro-Hungarian Navy. And that's where he gained his fame as a naval commander in World War I. So he was a remarkable student at the Naval Academy, and he became a junior officer, and he traveled the world. He learned a lot of languages in addition to Hungarian. So he traveled as far as New Zealand, acting as a naval envoy for Austria-Hungary. And he also went to America, and on all these places, he just went around the world, really. He got to see the world. So he became quite the cosmopolitan. But eventually, this over time did cause his Hungarian language skills to decay. So when he returned to Hungary, when he was talking, like he spoke he spoke Hungarian with a German accent, and he forgot a lot of Hungarian words, so his Hungarian was interspersed with English and German. So when he couldn't think of the Hungarian word, he'd use a German or an English one. So he led the fight against the communists at the head of the National Army, and he was later invited by the Hungarian Parliament, or what was left of it, to serve as the regent of Hungary and refound the Kingdom of Hungary. So he resented the Treaty of Trianon, and he said that the death of the Austro-Hungarian monarchy was the saddest moment of his life.
And the lecture cannot talk.
Anyway. So he led Hungary until 1944 as the regent, and later he went into exile in Portugal, and he died in 1957. So he lived long enough to see the Hungarian Revolution of 1956. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about the Kingdom of Hungary as it was founded in 1920. So Horthy and the National Army regained control of central Hungary from the communists. And Hungary entered into a period of relative stability. However, the country remained in a state of poverty and economic trouble due to the devastation of the war and the new borders. So Hungarian society's entire collective consciousness was focused on regaining the pre-war lands of Hungary, and reuniting the country and liberating the Hungarian citizens that had become stranded in the Entente zones of occupation. Horthy maintained his rule as regent of Hungary, and however, due to the Entente pressures, he was not allowed to have the rightful king, Blessed Charles of Austria, return to Hungary. Because if Charles was allowed to return to Hungary, the Allies would just invade and depose him again. Because it was a matter of Allied agreement that they said the Habsburgs will not rule in Hungary, which was a huge mistake. Hungary's economy would later recover, but became dependent on trade and investment with fascist Italy and Nazi Germany. And that's how they pulled themselves out of the most severe poverty. So they had food again, but at what cost? And this is also foreshadowing for Hungary's role in World War II. So now we're going to talk about Hungary in World War II. So Hungary was looking for opportunities to reclaim lands that had been lost during the Treaty of Trianon. Nazi Germany was rapidly expanding throughout Europe during the early stages of World War II. And Hungary basically just said, like, all right, I guess we got to ally with them, otherwise they're going to take us over. So they were basically forced to. And also, their economy was dominated by German and Italian interests. Due to this economic dependency, they were compelled to become Germany's lapdog. So Germany rewarded Hungary for being its docile client state with the Vienna Awards, or packages of Hungarian lands that had become occupied during World War I, being returned to Hungarian control briefly. And we'll talk about the Vienna Awards in the next slide. So, however, of course, Nazi Germany demanded the deportation of Hungarian Jews to Germany, where they died during the Holocaust. So Horthy, after he learned about this, dismissed the Hungarian prime minister, who was under Nazi influence. And then he appointed a new prime minister who was anti-Nazi, whose name was Miklos Kálay. And Horthy and Miklos Kálay protested the German dominance, and also they ended the deportation of Jews to Nazi Germany but obviously Germany said, enough with that, we're going to invade you, which is what happened. They were not strong enough to resist Hitler directly. So Horthy disliked the situation Hungary was in, and he attempted to make secret deals with the Allies and turn against Hitler. But as a result of the Nazi spies in Hungary, they learned about this, and they initiated Operation Marguerite, where they took direct control of the country. And it just goes without saying that this is one of the most shameful and dark chapters of Hungarian history right here. So now we need to talk about this, which is the map. So the yellow areas, and orange, are Hungary's borders during World War II. So the northern area, right here, which is the southern part of Slovakia, was the first Vienna Award, where they received areas that were Hungarian majority in Slovakia. The second Vienna Award was Carpatho, Ukraine, which was populated by Hungarians in Carpathia, as well as a Ukrainian minority. The third Vienna Award was the northern half of Transylvania, which was also a majority Magyar. And then the final Vienna Award was the awarding of the northern areas of Serbia to Hungary. They did not achieve their pre-Trianon borders. So after the German invasion of Hungary and the completion of Operation Panzerfaust / Marguerite, Nazi Germany took over Hungary and placed basically a homegrown Hungarian fascist party in the control of the Hungarian government with the anti-Semitic Arrow Cross Party in control of the Hungarian puppet regime. So Horthy was forced to resign because the Nazis had his son in a concentration camp, and they said, if you don't sign over control of the country, we're going to kill your son. So he gave up control of the country over to the SS. And then also Horthy himself got imprisoned, and he was under watch by SS guards until the end of the war. So now Germany was in total control of Hungary. And under the control of Nazi Germany, the deportation and murder of Jews resumed in Hungary, which was very sad.
What year was the German invasion?
1944. But so after the war, Hungary came into the Soviet sphere of influence as a result of the Paris Peace Conference. The Soviets claimed all of Eastern Europe as their zone of control. And they created, and also they returned Hungary to its pre-Trianon borders, so the Vienna Awards were for nothing. It was placed under the control of Hungarian Soviet sympathizers. And they created the new Socialist Republic of Hungary. So Hungarians, after this, would also endure decades of cruel socialist rule and poverty as a result of living in a one-party state with a planned economy. So due to socialist rule, all references to what Hungary had once been were eliminated. The education system was filled with communist propaganda to make the Soviets look good, and the Hungarian way of life was broken up and gradually replaced with Soviet conformity. Eventually, Hungary joined the Warsaw Pact, not of its own will, of course, and endured direct occupation by the Soviet army. So, Soviet Hungary. So, the dictator of Hungary, his name was Matyas Rákosi, and he ruled Hungary with a red iron fist. He considered himself to be Stalin's greatest pupil in Hungary, which, not good. So he conducted huge purges of anybody that he viewed as a threat to his power and control, and he used the secret police to maintain violent control when it was necessary. The economy was grossly managed by Rákosi, and the Hungarian people endured more famine-like conditions. It's a wonder they survived like decades of famine in a row after this. Basically, education was used as a tool to disseminate socialist propaganda and destroy traditional Hungarian culture, and eliminate and pacify religion. The Hungarian people were becoming fed up with these conditions, and they decided to do something about it, starting with the 1956 uprising against communist rule. So it began as a student demonstration against Soviet occupation, and it escalated into rioting, and eventually the Soviets appointed a new prime minister who was less bad, whose name was Imre Nagy. And eventually it escalated into rioting. The people and the Hungarian Socialist Army defectors, who defected from the Hungarian Communist Army, fought against occupying Soviet soldiers. And eventually Imre Nagy decided to unilaterally withdraw Hungary from the Warsaw Pact. And however, the Soviet Union invaded Hungary and deposed Imre Nagy and replaced him with János Kádár, who was a Soviet collaborator. And also, I need to explain the flag here. So the flag has a hole in the middle of it because the revolutionaries cut out the communist symbol from the middle of the flag and they flew it with the hole in the middle of it. And the flag with the hole in the middle of it is the symbol of resisting communism in Hungary. And then Hungary came under more occupation and control by the Soviet army. But they did loosen some things. Hungary was allowed to have goods imported from the West, and Hungarian citizens were more free to travel to the West than other socialist countries' citizens. But they remained a Warsaw Pact state with a planned economy until 1989. So the Hungarian people still lived in conditions that were pretty close to poverty. Like, if we were going by like American standards, they lived in poverty. But there was a thriving market for Western goods that were smuggled into the country, just like every other socialist economy. It was basically it was a quiet, dreary place to live. It was a sterile socialist nightmare. And of course, these buildings, these new brutalist housing developments, brutalist architecture, basically just like live in a concrete block. They were created as affordable housing, but they're soul-crushingly ugly. They were intentionally designed that way to break people's spirits. And they still exist today. A lot of them haven't been torn down yet. They still exist as affordable housing for people. But they're one of the many examples of socialist apartment blocks that are still standing, just like in Russia and Ukraine and all these other countries. They have just miles and miles of these socialist apartment blocks that really make you wish you didn't have to look at them. But however, in 1989, communism came crashing down. So the barbed wire fence on the border with Austria was dismantled, and Hungary, before that time, making it even easier for their citizens to flee to the west by removing travel restrictions altogether. So obviously independence was quite popular among Hungarian citizens, and the Soviet army actually withdrew from Hungary in 1989, which is how the country became independent. It's basically the occupying Soviet forces left, and free elections became allowed. And eventually all these new parties, these democratic parties, which were underground in Soviet Hungary, came to the surface. They were allowed to be in public, and they had the first ever elections where freely elected government was chosen. And then the new Republic of Hungary was proclaimed. So now we have to talk about Hungary basically since 1989. So, and as a result of the fall of communism at the end of the Cold War, Hungary gained its independence. And Hungary transitioned to a market economy rather well, because its previous planned economy was relaxed quite a bit. Private ownership of things was allowed, unlike the Soviet Union. Until the very end, they remained a hardcore planned economy state. But they lagged behind many other European countries for quite a while. Hungarian citizens didn't really escape the throes of poverty until the late 90s. And they formed the Visegrad Group, which was an economic alliance that helped it jumpstart its new market economy. And the Visegrad Group, I think, included Austria, Slovakia, and Poland, as well as Hungary. But corruption was rampant in Hungary's early years as a post-Soviet state. And I'm not going to say they eliminated corruption, it's just become less obvious. And people in Hungary became more free to explore their country's heritage and their past before socialism, which is really great. And then throughout the 2000s, Hungary's economy became one of the fastest growing in Europe. So now it's almost reached parity with Western European countries. And that's where our presentation is going to end. And then here I have a slide with a bunch of references that I used. And then the end. Come and see my presentation again. Anybody have questions?
I want to tell you that my aunt was the bookkeeper in Vienna for one of those smugglers that was doing border crossing. Wow. Yeah. She kept 3 sets of books.
Wow.
Yeah, they were Persian carpets and silk and stuff from Hungary and Western goods into Hungary.
Yeah, in Hungary, they while it was allowed to have Western goods that were actually legally bought and brought in, they were too expensive for Hungarians to actually buy. So the majority of Western goods that were owned by Hungarians were actually illicitly acquired. Even though the government said, but you can buy Western things, they're just 4 or 5 times as expensive as the socialist version.
Well, she was.
Yeah, that's heroic. You know, I think that's really awesome that you shared that with us. Yes?
Well, a friend of mine and her family left Hungary when they could, and well, they came to my temple in New Hampshire.
Mm-hmm.
But she talked about how bad it was.
Yeah, it was really quite miserable for Hungarians until the end. I mean, in 1989, sure, they weren't starving to death en masse, but nobody would choose to remain in Hungary if they were given the chance.
They really suffered from World War I.
Until now.
Because the Allies were really very hard on
Yeah.
Hungary.
Hungary, didn't deserve what it got.
They didn't deserve it.
No, and it caused so many problems further down the line. It caused them to turn to the Axis in World War II. It just wasn't that they really shot themselves in the foot with the whole Trianon thing. Any other questions?
You showed maps with separation of ethnic groups.
Right, yeah, the ethnic map.
Would I know, did they speak different languages?
Yes.
How were they separated?
So the language, I think this map is based on the census of 1910, which was the last census before World War I. And it's based on what people reported their ethnicity and language to be. So, German people spoke German, Magyars spoke Magyar. Their ethnicity and their language was basically connected.
Well, I'm trying to understand in my head whether it still exists today, that when people meet, they know what ethnic group you're in. Or are they so mixed, which would seem the normal way things go, that you could no longer draw a map like that?
This map doesn't exist today, and I actually failed to mention why. So after World War II, as a result of the Potsdam Agreement, where they were going to, basically the Allies said, all right, all Germans living in not Germany, so Germans living in Hungary, Germans living in Poland, or what used to be Prussia, basically Germans living anywhere outside of what the Allies said is Germany, have to get out and flee to Germany. And the Potsdam Agreement was basically ethnic cleansing conducted by the Allies to ensure that there would be, quote unquote, no more German irredentism. So the Hungarian Germans, who had been more than about 20% of the population of the Kingdom of Hungary for a while, 20% of the population of Hungary was gone in an instant.
For hundreds of years.
Hundreds of years they've lived in Hungary. Yes?
I have a question about, are these Germans from Germany? Or are they
No.
Germans?
They were from,
speaking
oh, sorry.
Also from Austria.
Austria was allowed to be there too. So basically they said to the Hungarian Germans, flee to Germany or flee to Austria, but you can't live here because we're going to throw you out.
If your history was German and you spoke German, they said you go to Germany.
Right.
You're out.
But
You
if
didn't
your
have
history was Austrian and you spoke German.
You could stay in Austria, but you couldn't stay in Hungary.
You couldn't be in Poland, you couldn't be in Hungary, you couldn't be in Romania. You couldn't live anywhere that wasn't a German-speaking country that the Allies recognized.
Now remember, these weren't people that had moved there. They'd been 7, 8, 10, 12 generations in Hungary. One day they come and they said, you're all in, you're going to Germany.
How did they know?
How did they know? Because they looked, the Soviet army went door to door and said, hey, what language do you speak in this house? And then they would respond in German. And then the Soviet army said, all right, you have 2 months to get out of here or we're going to kill you.
If you looked German, and if you spoke German, you were expelled. And you gotta remember the Magyars were Central Asian. So when people looked at them, they looked Asian. And so they'd say, okay, that's a Magyar, they can stay. The rest you gotta go. Your Europeans get out. And that wasn't the Hungarians saying they wanted to do that. That was the Allied state.
Yes, it was America, it was the Soviets, really. The Soviets were the ones enforcing this, where they basically went door to door in every Hungarian town and city, and if you responded to the door saying hello, yeah, you got kicked out. So basically the Germans who were able to continue living in Hungary, they hid. They pretended to be Magyar. They didn't respond to the door to the Red Army soldiers with hello.
And what does that fix? I forgot now. Why did they do that?
Why did they do that? Is so that Germany would never have any claims on other countries ever again based on ethnicity. So basically, the reason...
It's called conceptualized reservationism. And what you do with the reservation is you take any group that you're afraid of their expansionist views and you put them in one spot. So after World War I, we did it in Hungary. We said all of the Magyars will be in a reservation in central Hungary. After World War II, we said we're going to liberate Hungary by taking all the Germans and putting them only in Germany. So whatever group was triumphant in the previous regime, they would say, okay, we're gonna now suppress you so that we don't have to worry about you coming back and attacking us. You will live in a restricted area.
That still exists?
Yep.
Yep.
The Germans of Hungary, when they migrated to Austria, many of them went to Austria because it was closer, but a lot of them ended up in Austria or Germany, and they still retained their heritage as, we are Hungarians, we were forced out. And even though they speak German, they're German ethnicity, they consider themselves to be Hungarians first, Austrians and Germans second.
Now a lot of them went back to Hungary after the fall of Glasnost, after the fall of the Soviet Empire.
Some of them actually did return to Hungary. They returned to their old homes, their old towns, and created a new community there. So a lot of towns in Hungary, they have signs, like city limit signs in 3 languages. They have the Hungarian, they have the German name, and then some of them very close to the border with Slovakia and Transylvania have the third name in Slovak or Romanian. But yeah, a lot of these Germans who were expelled were able to return to Hungary after World War II, not after World War II, after the fall of communism. They were allowed to return because the ethnic policy had kind of been relaxed. Yes?
What happened to the minority groups? I mean, you're talking great populations of Germans, there have to be minorities.
Yes, the minorities. So Slovakia, very northern upper Hungary, was basically, the countryside was inhabited by Slavic people, Slovaks, but the cities were the territory of the Magyars and the Germans. So Pressburg, which is called Bratislava today, is the capital of Slovakia. But back then, before they drove out the Germans, German people were the main ethnic group in Pressburg. It was called Kossuth in Hungarian. But
you gotta remember, the Germans were generally more affluent than the historical Magyars because they had been brought in as craftsmen.
yeah, they were tradespeople, city dwellers, merchants. They lived. They were not rural. Well, except for the ones who were rural, who lived in Transylvania.
The biggest chunks of them were bourgeois, right? So they lived in the city, they had higher income, they historically always had higher income, so they kind of lived that way.
Which is what animated the Slovaks against them, was that they were viewed as the rich people who were oppressing them, whereas the Slovaks were rural and
They were farmers.
they were farming people.
Territory would be Slovaks would be the farmers.
What about the religiously?
Oh, yes, religious minorities. So the majority of the Kingdom of Hungary was Catholic, but Protestantism had appeared in the 15th century, 16th century, and Protestantism was a rural minority in most of Hungary. There were just a couple villages, in every county where everybody knew that those guys were Protestants and you had to leave them alone because they were different, versus the majority of Hungary being Catholic. But also, in Transylvania, the Vlachs, they were Orthodox. A lot of them were Orthodox, but they became Uniates when the Orthodox churches had agreed to return to the Catholic Church as Greek churches.
You got to remember that. When we went back to the Ottoman Empire, when they drove the Ottomans out, they drove Muslims out, right? It was all Christian. Everything was going to be Christian religion in there. So there was a small amount of non-Catholic, but everyone was Christian. So there was some Orthodox Christians over here. There was a small group that were non-Catholic Christians here, but the vast majority of the country was Catholic.
So anyone in the Jewish faith were.
Oh, yes, okay, so I did not mention the Jews yet, I'm sorry. So the Jews were they lived in cities. They were the urban minority. That they were very well-to-do because they were craftspeople and merchants and all of these things. But also, they were a respected minority, especially in Budapest, where quite a bit of them went to universities and became the intellectual class of Hungary. And also, after World War I, a lot of these intellectual Jewish Hungarians had to emigrate from Hungary due to the poverty. And they ended up in America, and you had a lot of big names in scientific America, like John von Neumann, and Theodore von Karman, and a lot of them were Hungarian Jews who had emigrated from Hungary, and they ended up in America, where they were able to use their scientific talents for America.
So World War I had destroyed a lot of the Jewish population. They had left of their own accord because of poverty. World War II comes along, and they were decimated. Right. There was not hardly any Jewish people left in Hungary. The ones that were in hiding. After World War II, did some Jewish people come back? Yeah, but so many of them had died. So many had been relocated. A lot of them went to Israel. So there was a much smaller population of Jewish people in Hungary.
What?
They were always small. There was never a huge population of Jewish people in Hungary. They were always a minority.
Yep. Oh, I thought you had a question.
Oh, sorry guys, they're telling us we got to wrap up so the Super Bowl can go in.
Oh, wow, they're going to watch the Super Bowl.
If
Okay.
there's one more question, we can answer one question.
Yes?
I wanted to make an observation.
Okay.
In my head, an emphasis on keeping an ethnic group together rather than splitting them up is a recipe for later problems in which it's easy to use that for the wrong reason.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Well,
Throughout history, that's happened over and over and over. Yeah.
And so it's not always a bad thing to be dispersed.
I want to thank you though for this wonderful
yeah.
presentation. It's
Uh-huh.
been great.
Thank you for coming. You know, I really enjoyed your additions to the presentation and your questions.
What's your next lecture?
So I have them every other
I
Sunday.
think it's 2 weeks.
I think it's in
Not-
2
Not
weeks.
next week, but the week
Ask
after.
them what they want to hear about.
What do you want to hear about? Anybody have any suggestions?
We changed things a little this time. Connor was covering epochs before. We decided to take an area and do an area.
Uh-huh.